born after 1996? Huh? Before. No, I don't believe you. Okay. 1996 में सत्ता में आया 13 दिन राज सिर्फ क्यों? नो अदर पार्टी विल टच इट भाई सेक्युलर नहीं है ये 1998 में वही पार्टी जो कहा नहीं नहीं आ जाओ हम आगे विल बी हैप्पी टू डू उसका जो कम्युनल अनटचेबिलिटी चला गया 2002 में क्या हुआ गुजरात नॉट ए सिंगल पार्टी विच वॉज इन द एनडीए ब्रोक क्रिटिसाइज किया था बट दे स्टेड इन पावर You can be killing Muslims, it doesn't matter, we want to be in power. Look at the change in 2002. DMK and TMC moved later, not because of Gujarat 2002. And of course today, the whole change. What is the difference between the Sangh and other far-right forces elsewhere? One, this force has existed for over 90 years. Two, it has a depth of implantation in society much greater than anywhere else. During the fascist era, Mussolini and Hitler, they never had that prior to coming to power. State power was what was important for them there. But here you have an implantation here. Third, it is the only major party in India that has never had a split, a major split. Congress का split हुआ, जो socialist party, लोहिया ट्रेडिशन के कितने सारे splits हुए हैं, हाँ? Leftist parties got split हुए but जनसंघ changes into the BJP याद है जब 1977 में जब हुआ था तो they just walked out all of them then they changed it has never had a split and second of course compared to Brazil compared to Duterte Philippines France etc the other parties are so much weaker even put together electorally whereas in Brazil and Duterte France the other parties which have shifted to the right are still electorally quite powerful. In fact, why is it that they have such ideological coherence, the cadres? Because that's very simple. It's not like being a leftist. अगर आप leftist हो और अगर आप कोई leftist group में होगा so you must have an understanding of everything. How do we do this? What is the position we should take on this? What is this? What is this? What is this? Or you have splits this and here. You must have a larger vision. If you want to be part of the Sangh and all, it's very simple. We must make India strong. How do we make India strong? Hindus must unite. It's very simple. You don't have to be very complicated or anything like that. Very clear. This is it. This is the key. Other things can follow. Huh? I'll come to that later here. But you see that if you look at this whole period from the late 1960s till very recently, of course, 2014, you will find that, in fact, there have been 5 processes whose intersection and interweaving has shaped Indian politics. The steady, sometimes interrupted, but forward march of Hindutva. Second, Dalit assertion. Third, Muslim ferment. Not so long ago, the Kerala Muslim had more in common with the Kerala Hindu than the Kerala Hindu had with the North Indian Hindu, or the Kerala Muslim had with the North Indian Muslim. Huh? Now, in fact, the sense of Muslims being a community has become much stronger. And in fact, and that's obvious for all sorts of reasons, especially the communal. In fact, the Indian government no longer gives the details of the number of Muslims killed in riots or pogroms, etc., which is always much more than their proportion in the population. In fact, it's like black people in the United States. The proportion of black people, even as you have a middle class of blacks and upper class of blacks are 13%, 12% of the US population. But the proportion of blacks in prisons is much greater than that. Look at the Indian prison system, including under trials and all. The proportion of Dalits and lower castes and the proportion of Muslims will be higher than their proportion in the general population. Yeah. But you have this Muslim problem. Fourth, the regionalization of the Indian polity. Regional parties here. Fifth, the growing reactionary character of the Indian middle class. What's happened now? The regionalization of the Indian polity has become much weaker. Dalit assertion and lower caste assertion has been replaced by the Hindutvaization of the OBCs and also the Hindutvaization of Dalits. So these are developments that are taking place. They are reflecting, if you like, this whole question of what we mean by hegemony. And what is hegemony? And the fact is that the Sangh has attained a certain hegemony. And what does this mean? How do you attain hegemony? How do you expand hegemony? Hegemony is three things. One, you become the principal arbiter within the different sections of the ruling classes. You are the most important factor in that. Mediator. Yeah? Second, support from the middle class, petty bourgeoisie, banyas and others. Third, carrots and sticks for those below. Kanna or sticks or carrots. उसके साथ मगर ये काफ़ी नहीं है. आपको जो टेंशन जो है, जो कॉन्फ्लिक्ट ऑफ इंटरेस्ट जो है नीचे और ऊपर में, उसको छुपाना होगा. और साथ में सिर्फ छुपाना नहीं, आपको सबको यूनिफाई करना होगा. तो ग्रामशी ने क्या कहा? हेजेमनी रिक्वायर्स बिल्डिंग ए नेशनल पॉपुलर विल. नेशनलिज्म बिकम्स एब्सोल्युटली क्रूशल फॉर डूइंग दैट. और नेशनलिज्म में अलग अलग कंसेप्शंस हैं, अलग अलग आइडियाज है कि कैसे करने का. हमेशा देखते हैं नेशनल मूवमेंट में ये है, मगर ये बहुत ज़रूरी है कि आप नेशनलिज्म के ऊपर कब्जा करने का, उस आइडिया को डोमिनेट करने का होगा. और ये है. अब ये जो संघ का क्या उनका गोल जो है, उनका उद्देश्य क्या है? वेरी सिंपल. इलेक्टोरल सिस्टम को नहीं हटाने का. बदलाव हो गया एवरीवेयर. The power of ordinary people for some kind of democracy is very strong. अगर आपने इलेक्ट्रल सिस्टम को अलग कर दिया, जैसे कि इमरजेंसी में हुआ है, तो तुम्हारे जो स्थिति जो है और तुम्हारा जो रेपुटेशन नेशनली और इंटरनेशनली बहुत खराब होगा. इलेक्शंस आर स्टिल वेरी वेरी इंपॉर्टेंट फॉर यू टू गेट दैट लेजिटिमेसी. और खासकर में उनका इतना बड़ा वोट मोबिलाइजिंग मशीन है, तो वो कर रहे हैं और कर रहे हैं. तो दैट्स वेरी मच इम्पोर्टेंट. तो मगर जो आपका जो ओपोनेंट्स है, उनको या तो कब्जा कर लो या तो उनको हटा लो. हाँ, और एक ही मेन पार्टी है नेशनली, और बाकियों को आप या तो कर लो या तो हटा लो. हाँ, सो यू हैव दिस होल प्रोसेस ऑफ इलेक्टोरल दिस थिंग. व्हाट डू यू डू विद द डेमोक्रेटिक इंस्टीट्यूशन? जैसे कि हिटलर और मुसोलिनी वगैरह, उनको खत्म करने का वन पार्टी स्टेट, नो डेमोक्रेसी, डिक्टेटरशिप नहीं. उनको अंदर से खत्म करो, कमजोर कर दो. So you hollow out your democratic institutions, you hollow out federalism. How do you hollow out federalism? Economically, GST. उनके पास कम पैसे हैं. जो तुम्हारा पार्टीज है, बीजेपी रूल, डबल इंजन, उनको ज्यादा पैसे देंगे. हाँ, दैट इज वन. और वन नेशन वन पोल. You want to move towards that. थर्ड, देखो क्या हो रहा है. तुम्हारा डिसिडेंट्स जो है, डिसिडेंट्स, opponents, liberal, leftists, others, this thing, anybody, anything here. इमरजेंसी समय में इंदिरा गांधी ने क्या यूज किया अपने डिसीजन को हटाने के लिए? The law was MISA, maintenance of and who did this? कब्जा करने, अरेस्ट करने का? लोकल पुलिस. Now not state level, WAPA at the center, NIA, CBI center. We use it here. So now you are having this kind of a process here. All about democratic institutions and federalism. Third, inferiorize, terrorize, ghettoize minorities, communists, others, particularly Muslims. Second class citizenship in de facto sense. Very much here. And that's very much taking place. Fourth, ideological homogenization. Media, the strong media, print media, electronic media, social media, trolls वगैरह वगैरह, education system and Bollywood. Even before this, When they first came to power in 2014, they made Bollywood an industry, which it was not before. Industry meant you can give from the center money here, you can have censorship, control, not just Kashmir files, even before this, you can see all of these things. So yeah, and what has happened? The terms of discourse have now become completely changed. Huh? If you say anything or you criticize anything anti-national, and you can be arrested for this. And what is acceptable now is just incredible what people can say. And that's what was there. Let's come to this question of making India strong. Hindutva. Making India strong. How do you make, according to Hindutva, how do you make India strong? You have to do it in one of 2 days. You have to unite Hindus. Savarkar ne kya bola? Unite Hindus and militarize Hindutva. Militarize Hindutva. Now, how do you unite Hindus? Only 2 ways. Not 3 ways, not 4 ways, not 5 ways. Only 2 ways. You have to either find some principle of unification internal to Hinduism. Difficult. Only candidate loose accommodating Brahmanism. So, among Dalits, तुम्हारा जो हीरोज है, तुम्हारे जो गुरुज है, तुम्हारे जो है, वो भी हमारा हिंदू है. हाँ? मगर साथ साथ में जो ब्राह्मण है, अपर कास्ट वगैरह, उनको भी साथ में ले जा रहे हैं, तो इतना दूर नहीं जा सकते. मगर कुछ हद तक जाओ, लूज अकोमोडेटिंग. हाँ, ये वो. So you have loose accommodating. Much better, unite the whole of Hindus against somebody outside. And all right-wing populisms, all right-wing authority, do it everywhere. Le Pen, immigrants, Muslims, this that. Elsewhere, this thing here, blacks, Christian evangelism in the US. In Sri Lanka, the Buddhists, not just Muslims, but also against Tamil Jaffna, Hindus. And there are elsewhere, all sorts of differences you have here. So you have externally. But how do you raise, what do you call it, externally against Muslims in India? I think the Muslim community is not ruling over you. It's among the poorest sections of Indian society. So how do you generate this? One, politics of historical grievance. They ruled us before in the past. Second, historical revenge, Second, grievances, appeasement. Huh? As if, forget about triple talaq, the only country which has actually criminalized Muslim men with this, which is a civic thing. It's ridiculous. But nevertheless, yeah. But they have this advantage. We have had Hindu reform law, and therefore they are the ones who are benefiting in this. So you cultivate grievances of various kinds. Third, fear. अरे उनका पॉपुलेशन बढ़ रहा है, हाँ? अरे लव जिहाद, अरे लैंड जिहाद, वो ले रहे हैं, ये वो all sorts of ways in which you generate this thing. और उनका nationalism, there are 2 ways you can understand nationalism. You can either understand nationalism as something that is inherited from the past. See, जितने भी nationalism है, काफी हद तक वो invent करते हैं अपना past. हम हमेशा रहा. It's not true. Nationalism is something very modern. The notion of citizenship is something very modern. Apart from the restricted citizenship in Athens and Greece, which never included slaves or women. But every point here is that you have here an invention of the past, but you either see nationalism as something inherited from the past, in which case हमेशा dispute रहेगा. हमेशा dispute रहेगा कि what is the correct inheritance and who are the true inheritors. Hinduness is the true inheritors and Hindus are the true inheritors. No, it's composite that. लड़ाई होता रहेगा. The second way is to understand nationalism is not something that belongs to the past, it belongs to the present and future. It is what we will make of it. There is no essence from the past in nationalism, which is why you can have Pakistan, but then Bangladesh breaks away from it. It's why in the future you can have Scotland wanting to break away from UK. You have South Sudan breaking away. Why Czechia and Slovakia broke away? Why East Germany and Germany come together? It's not necessarily that happening. It's part of what happens now. In other words, it's either something you make of it, which makes it much more humane, much more tolerant, or whatever. Or you say this is the essence. Are you familiar with the story of Sleeping Beauty? Huh? No? Sleeping Beauty एक फेरी टेल है, जिसमें क्या था कि एक स्लीपिंग ब्यूटी थी और शी वॉज स्लीपिंग थ्रू द सेंचुरीज और एक प्रिंस चार्मिंग आया और प्रिंस चार्मिंग ने उसको चुम्मी दी और वो उठ पड़ी. शी हैड बीन पुट टू स्लीप बाय द इविल विच. तो हिंदुत्व हैज अ स्लीपिंग ब्यूटी कॉन्सेप्ट ऑफ नेशनलिज्म. The sleeping beauty of Indian nationalism was its Hinduness that has always existed. But वो सोया हुआ था. मगर अब जो प्रिंस चार्मिंग है, जो फोर्सेज ऑफ हिंदुत्व जो है, नहीं, फोर्सेज ऑफ हिंदुत्व आर गिविंग इट द किस ऑफ पॉलिटिक्स और उसको उठा दिया. मगर जैसे कि इविल विच ने उनको सुला दिया, तो व्हाट इज द इविल विच which has kept this Hinduness sleeping and preventing it from coming up? Was it Mughals? No. Was it Persians? No. Was it Afghans? No. Was it Turks? No. It was Muslims. Because when you say Muslims, you can put all of them together and you can also include all those Muslims that came by trade there. They are the ones, the rich, that put it to sleep. And please, if you want to be powerful, if you don't want to fight for decency and humanity, forget everything else. Just concentrate on being powerful, in which case you know which direction to go. That is your objective. So yes, we have to fight on the terrain of democratic nationalism, if you like, to make it much more democratic, because there is always competing understandings of nationalism. Just a minute, is this something that belongs to a past, or is this something that we make of it today? In fact, nationalism is something that gets born, it dies out, all sorts of things. And one thing is that here, is that today we are faced with 5 problems that cannot be solved at the level of nationalism. They can only be solved at the international level. But to get there, we have to have a much more progressive nationalism to be able to move. What are those 5 things which cannot be resolved? I'm lucky, you're going to face it, not me. What are those 5 issues here? 1, this obscene situation of this increasing inequality of income and wealth and power when there is in fact massive poverty and massive suffering on a global scale. The very nature of existing capitalism. It's incredible. It's shameful. You see, unfortunately, I have been teaching it to you and I tell you that the most important ism for many young people today is not liberalism, it's not socialism, it's not capitalism, it's not humanism. It's careerism. And careerism means कि आप जो नीचे आपको है उनको दबाओ और जो ऊपर आया उनको आप मस्का लगाओ. There will always be difference, there will always be a break, but that unfortunately is the reality today. But anyway, my point here, what are the 5? 1, this. Second, the politics of cultural exclusivism, which is merged everywhere. The right-wing shift, dramatic, connected to this. Third, connected to the economy and the nature economy. Health, pandemics of various kinds. They are coming from 3 things. They are coming, 1, from the elimination of the space between human habitation and wildlife, zoonotics. They are coming from the industrialization of agriculture, including of livestock production. Third, they are coming from the scale of urbanization, which involves mass slums. These are all 3 developments. It's getting worse in the advanced countries, and this is the future, where the big cities in India and the global south, in which are having more and more. And of course, massive migration between there, because you don't have proper jobs and all. India is one of the worst countries this way. You think that question of health? Look at what's happened in the last 20 years of different SARS epidemics and this that is taking place over here. Fourth, ecological devastation. Every day, 75 different species of plant and animal and insect life are being finished, on average. Forget about keeping under 1.5. It's going to be crossed over. And we in India, why should we bother about those small islands which are going to get flooded? But you know, India में क्या होने वाला है? peninsular है ना India. So you will have low-lying. Bangladesh will be very bad. Other parts will happen. What is going to happen? You will have a fortress India in which those who are beneficiary and better off and better कहते हैं भाई ये तो migration होने वाला हमारे पास नहीं आना चाहिए. क्योंकि आप माइग्रेशन की बात करते हैं, the biggest migration from rural to urban, temporary and second migration to neighboring countries, third migration from poorer countries to advanced countries. Each area में border patrols है. दिल्ली में gated communities, वो जो पब्लिक पार्क है जिसमें सब जाना चाहिए, नहीं उधर नहीं आना चाहिए, हाँ खतरा है, वो चोरी कर सकते हैं. मगर हमारे दोस्त जो है वो सब बिग इंडस्ट्रियलिस्ट है जो चोरी तो करते रहते हैं, हाई लाइन वो डजंट मैटर, या पेइंग गेटेड अर्बन डिस्ट्रिक्ट. दूसरा जो है ऐसे इंटरनल एरिया एक्सटर्नल, और ग्लोबल लेवल में ग्लोबल पेट्रोल. When we need poor labor, we'll get it from Mexico this, but enough, then we stop, off and on. Advanced, intellectual, skilled people, yes, stop. Huh? But you have this, not my way. Fifth, ecological devastation is going to be very, very serious. Huh? Fifth, nuclear weapons. We found immorality of nuclear weapons. You are saying to myself, in the name of national security, I have the right to threaten the destruction of future generations. And of course, and I can talk about this later, but these are the signs. Lastly, how do we fight it? Number one, India, a long-term struggle. For a long-term struggle, who are the long-term actors? India में 5 choices. One, look, some is this here, far right fascist characteristics. Other parties, Congress, SP, Yevo, Dara, not like that. Correct. Mainstream left here. So one, we have to look to some other party. Congress, let's revive the Congress. Others, no, don't revive that. A newer bourgeois party. So difference between Christopher Jaffrello, Congress, we have to revive his history. Second, Yugendra Yadav, others. Congress should contribute from its history and past and helping to build something new here. But what is the politics of all these other parties? Soft Hindutva, neoliberal capitalism, and foreign policy, no real difference, minor difference. But this is the way forward. Second, India is a country with tremendous movements, progressive social movements everywhere. Right? Huh? बहुत सारे remarkable movements, remarkable people. मगर उनको हमको जोड़ना चाहिए. मगर जो कोशिश हुआ है ये उनको जोड़ने के लिए, the most important जो कोशिश हो रहा, most effort जो था इसमें NAPM और सफल नहीं. Third, भाई दलित assertion, ये उनकी कमजोरी है. दलित अपसर्च, मगर दलित अपसर्च में हम क्या देखते हैं? और लोअर कास्ट अपसर्च. Lower caste upsurge is not for eliminating the caste system, but for in fact moving upwards. Huh? So when you want to move upwards, compromise the same. In fact, it's very interesting. सब जो दलित ग्रुप्स हैं वो अम्बेडकर को खड़ा करते हैं. ठीक है, अम्बेडकर. मगर अम्बेडकर ने क्या किया था? एक जमाने में वो कोशिश कर रहा था इंडिपेंडेंट लेबर पार्टी बनाने की. दलितों का हाल और लोअर क्लास का जो हाल है उनको जोड़ के हमको लड़ाई करने का. जैसे कि अभी भी क्या स्थिति है? The near majority of Dalits are the landless laborers, but the majority of landless laborers are not Dalits. If you want to improve the condition of the near majority of Dalits or the majority of lower caste who are poor, but the poor is majority, not just Dalits or lower caste, you have to have some kind of a unity and struggle there. अम्बेडकर ने क्या किया? ILP को छोड़कर उसने कहा अगर हमको हटाना है कास्ट सिस्टम को तो हमें बुद्धिस्ट बनना चाहिए, न्यू बुद्ध. दिस वॉज एक्चुअली एन एस्केप रूट रादर देन अ चैलेंज टू द कास्ट सिस्टम. और आजकल क्या स्थिति है कि अम्बेडकर के समय से अभी आप देखो जो प्रपोर्शन जो है न्यू बुद्धिस्ट का In fact, you have many more Dalits and others who are not Yatyas and others going along and saying at least because we are Hindu, we are part of a larger force, cultural upliftment. But that's the third. Fourth, existing mainstream left or the far left. That is one distinction. Their situation in many ways is even as difficult, if not more than that. Fifth, a new kind of left that is much more democratic, that is much more humane, and internally democratic and committed to this thing here. And that will come, of course, from sources. And I talk in terms of three concentric circles, which are not fixed, but overlapping. A newer kind of a left which should come from discussion, dialogue, and working together. Others, these progressive social movements and other political forces. क्योंकि जब आप struggle करेंगे तो आपको alliances करना होगा और ये जो alliances जो है वो अलग अलग स्तर पर होगा at different levels, differently. जैसे कि मैं उदाहरण देता हूँ कि ये long term struggle में what are the weak points, कमजोर points against neoliberalism? Jobs, welfare, health, education, social security, housing, all crucial things. ये जो सरकार क्या कर रहा है? Very interesting. ये थोड़े से schemes कर रहे हैं which are not costly economically, but जिसका impact political, example का जो impact है बड़ा है. सब जगह जो neoliberalism हो रहा है, दो किस्म का neoliberalism. एक जिसको आप कहते हैं disciplinary neoliberalism, दूसरा जो है compensatory neoliberalism. Compensatory neoliberalism, हाँ ये inequality, विषमता बढ़ रहा है, ये हो रहा है, ये हो रहा है, मगर हम ये कुछ स्कीम्स करेंगे जो सुधारने के लिए थोड़ा सा असर होगा. हाँ, तो आपको उज्ज्वला का गैस मिलेगा एक बार, उसके बाद आपका रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटी करने का. हाँ, हमने स्वच्छ भारत किया है, डिग्निटी है, ये वो है, मगर जो स्थिति जो है इम्प्लीमेंटेशन के लिए बहुत ही खराब है. डजंट मैटर. और ये चलता रहेगा जो भी पार्टी होगा. बट इन द मीन टाइम more and more of healthcare will be privatized. More and more of education will be privatized. More and more of this will be because you make more money. And it becomes an excuse. Now they will even move towards direct cash transfers, but targeted. West में कह रहे हैं between left and right, give a basic minimum income to everybody. हाँ? Right wing जो idea है इसमें, give a small income to everybody. Universal basic income, but don't bother about that's enough. Don't bother about improving healthcare, education, making it universal, available, and quality and all that. Left wing version, basic minimum income, plus you have to improve all of these things. Huh? India में you won't have universal basic income, you will have some direct cash transfers. Yeah. और जो BJP ruled states है उसमें सरकार जो सेंटर में है उनको पैसे देंगे ताकि वो कुछ कर सकते हैं, जैसे कि यूपी में ईश्वर और ईश्वर में आपको 6,000 रुपीज पर साल मिलता है, 500 रुपीज तो जिसको मिलता है एक फैमिली को. चलो हमें 500 तो मिला. एंड दिस बिकम्स कॉम्पेंसेशन फॉर नॉट डूइंग इट बिकॉज यू आर हैविंग अ प्राइवेटाइजेशन एवरी ईयर और अदर प्रोसेस. सो दैट्स इलेक्टरल रिफॉर्म्स, बाय इलेक्शंस. First past the post system. Ridiculous. It's totally undemocratic. मगर जो दूसरे पार्टीज हैं जो मालूम है कि अगर सेंटर पे अगर ये प्रोपोर्शनल रिप्रेजेंटेशन सिस्टम हुआ है तो फिर कोalition गवर्नमेंट जो शुरू होगा उससे कुछ कंट्रोल होगा पार्टी में. वो नहीं करना चाहते. क्यों? क्योंकि स्टेट लेवल पे भी करना होगा और वो नहीं चाहते क्योंकि स्टेट लेवल में फर्स्ट पास्ट द पोस्ट सिस्टम उनका संभावना है कि उनको वो भी सत्ता में आ सकते. But if you are really talking about democracy, you're talking about that eradicating caste. It's not simply moving upwards. USA में feminist movement, racist movement, anti-racist movement, anti-caste movement. क्या देखते हैं? It's all about discrimination, opposing discrimination. इसका मतलब क्या है? We don't want discrimination. We want to be treated like others. And इसमें क्या होता है कि एक section ऊपर आ जाता है. So you now have middle class blacks in the United States and upper class blacks which are 4 times more than they were, 5 times more than they were 30 years ago. But the majority of blacks are suffering. You will have women who will be able to go up and also be there part of this thing and all that over here. Huh? But the condition of women generally at the lowest levels and all that will remain. Dalits, lower caste, which section? ऊपर आ सकता है. You have to fight against this caste system, eradicate it. In our constitution, we are banned untouchability. We have not outlawed the caste system. We can't even put in the directive principles. और किसी ने कहा कि how can you outlaw affirmation? Why not? U.S. Constitution में you can have anti-racism, you can still have affirmative action, but at least you can declare we are against racism, we are against patriarchy. But the question of eradicating caste. एक ज़माना hope था कि lower caste will join in the fight to eliminate caste, not just want to move upwards. But that's also not true. Deeper democratization. Deeper democratization simply means not just legislative, more power, subsidiarity, these participatory budgeting, deepening the control of ordinary people's control at panchayat level, district level, this, that, etc. All of this. Democratization within the armed forces, democratization within law. Why can't lawyers have much greater say in what's their, who are the judges and so on? Why not all kinds within the armed forces? Ordinary soldiers are moving towards this. Democratization at every level. In the 70s, मैं तो इंग्लैंड में रहा, part of the anti-racism movement. Schools में, universities में कहते थे कि the university is a system in which you have students, teachers, administration. All of them should be stakeholders, and we should have some structure where all of us discuss how to improve the university system. वो तो चला गया. Working factories में, workers, others वगैरह. These are all forms of deeper democratization, which you have to struggle for. Building cadres, ideology and activism. You need cadres implantation in society. Long-term struggle में you can't do without this. The strength of the Sangh Parivar, now there are two types of cadres. वो जो cadres जो है, जो हमेशा उसको ideology को किया है, काफी discipline रहा करते हैं. और दूसरा जो है कि उनकी स्टेट पावर में है, पैसे मिलेगा, ये मिलेगा, नौकरी मिलेगा, ये मिलेगा, पैटर्निज्म दोनों हो गए. But you need, and once upon a time the left party said, that is how the left grew. Left parties had these cadres there, and it was in the long term stuff. What is that? और लास्टली एक बहुत अजीब बात हुआ है, जब ग्रेट डिप्रेशन हुआ था 1920s, 1930s में, the response to that and how they got out of that Great Depression was in fact wartime mobilization or Keynesianism. जब Keynesianism crisis में संकट में हो गया, तो you had the shift towards neoliberalism. Neoliberalism का crisis 2007 to 2009 में आया, the Great Recession. मगर उसके बाद क्या हुआ? नया सिस्टम नहीं, the same old system. In that way. Today, जो relationship of forces जो है between those at the bottom and those has become much wider in favor of them, and they are not going to give up their advantages. So, in order to fight against that, you will find that even if you try to fight, and we have to fight for reforms and all that, मेरा कहने का मतलब क्या होगा? Is the question of getting rid of capitalism itself will become more important. Because the shift in relational forces is so great now that if you want to move towards doing that, you will immediately threaten them in much more seriously, and they will not want to give away to that. And yet that's the only hope. We are now in a situation where ecology is messing us up. I've given you all these things to do. And things are going to get worse, but we have to fight to make it better. Anyway, I should stop there.
कोई सवाल में बात एक एक करके सर माइक नहीं
वो माइक काम नहीं करता No questions? Everybody agrees with me?
What is different between ethnicity and nations? The schools, so they are ethnic community as well as they are also a nation.
ethnicity and nation. Ethnicity and nation, okay.
So you have said that equal citizen and citizen equally. What is the difference between?
You talk about religious fundamentalism as a political force, but back in 2002, after the 9/11 attack in 2001, it was considered as an economic force as well. So, like ISI's culprit and taking over the oil economy and everything. So, how do you relate economy and politics as well?
So one thing. The cultural hegemony of BJP, which is there in at present, sir, through media, through like schools, through Puja Mandir. So how it can be countered, sir?
Let me take these three questions.
I have a question.
So अभी UN में resolution pass हुआ था about Islamophobia, and the Indian representative said that instead of Islamophobia, we should talk about religion.
We should talk about
Religion phobia or some sort of instead of just Islamophobia. So it's your comment.
okay.
Sir, is this populist rise all around the world has something to do with the crisis of state system?
Okay, that's 5 questions. Sorry, can I just finish these 5 questions?
sure.
Okay. Ethnicity and nation. Ethnicity usually refers to some particular identity that is ascribed, that is given to you because of birth or whatever, right? So, for example, if you are born in a certain caste, it's not something that you choose so much. It's something that has been given to you and defines you. The nation, you are born there, but you can change your nation in a way that you can't change your ethnicity. You get what I mean? So that's a big difference between ethnicity and nation. And of course, the ethnicity is an imagined community that you imagine with all the others of that particular. That will be the difference between ethnicity and nation. The political dimension automatically of the nation, and the fact that this is something that gives you an element of choice, that you can move and become part of another nation, and therefore have another national. Citizens, we are not necessarily equal citizens. Some maybe have more rights than others. We are not equally worthy. We are not all worth equally. Some people are more worthy than others. But saying that citizens being equal, citizens worthy equally is different from saying equally worth. Or rather, it's the other way around. So equally worth. I simply make the point that citizens, we are defined as citizens equally. But that's important. But that doesn't mean that we are all equal. Today, for example, there are many citizens who are not equally because you have all kinds of discrimination and rights that you don't have elsewhere. So that's only the difference I'm saying here. One is more formal, the other is substantive. But the formal aspect is important and not weak. For example, when we talk about procedural democracy, certain formal principles, they have a certain content. But the substantive content can be much less. So that's the only point here. But that doesn't mean citizenship was a great advance from being subjects. So that's the point of view. Third, religious fundamentals can also be economic. Politically they of course want political power, and through political power also have certain economics and all that. But what is interesting here is that the domain in which religious fundamentalism or communalism usually want to bring about changes is not so much in the domain of anti-capitalism or whatever, other thing here. It's much more in the domain of family and education. In other words, your religious, whatever your interpretation of religion is, you want to take that to be able to shape family relations. Women, okay, they should get jobs, but they should not be divorced in Hindu families. The families, the mother's role is also to bring up the children. This is very worthy respect and all that. we don't like divorce, we don't want children out of wedlock, this, that, all that again, right? Similarly, in education will change here. But when it comes to capitalism, the importance of religious or religious principles is much less, or hardly at all. Even in Islamic countries, they may say that you shouldn't have interest or whatever here, but they are basically capitalist countries. They're operating, taking so the religious independence is so. And I also point out distinction rules of turning. Islamophobia, religiophobia. Listen, we are opposed to all kinds of exclusivisms. But who can doubt that Islamophobia is a much dominant current today? And the question is, why is it the case? It's also connected to the whole history of colonialism and after colonialism. Colonialism by European countries dominated Africa and dominated the Hindu and Buddhist world. That was the area. It did not have so much dominance, and of course in Latin America, it did not have so much dominance over the Muslim world. Why? Because of the existence until at least the First World War of the Ottoman Empire. Right? So after the fall of the Ottoman Empire, you had a number of countries in the Muslim Middle East, North Africa, that became independent or were only under mandates, which was an indirect form of rule. Unlike the Hindu part of the world or the Buddhist part of the world, or the African part of the world over there. That was one. So they were more independent. Second, they had economic wealth, oil and elsewhere, etc. That was very, very important for them. Third, there was more resistance from these parts of the world towards the West than elsewhere. Don't forget that apart from certain countries like Saudi Arabia becoming independent, Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, they all became independent before 1947. And over here is that you also had secular movements in these parts of the world which are against the West. Secular movements of nationalism, Baathism, Nasserism, they were all leftism. There were lots of communist movements in the Middle East and all. It is only after their defeat that you have the rise of religious political movements in the Middle East. So one is their history of independence and not being colonized. Second is this is also a part of the world where you have dictatorships, which many of them are very pro-West and aligned with the West. But because they have at the longest continuing dictatorship in many cases, you have a public which is very much opposed to those dictatorships. So this is also a very tricky part of the world in which you have this. So you've had, of course, given this, and because you had, of course, as I got in the West, in Western Europe, the migration that took place from these countries because of struggles of various kinds and so on. You had the rise of Islamophobia for a variety of reasons. Why should the US and the West be opposed to Hindutva? The Indian government has an alliance with the West. Okay, you have Saudi Arabia and other countries over there, but you've also had resistances from that. And isn't it interesting that it is this Muslim majority part of the world that has also given severe defeats to Western invaders and Western opponents? They have a longer history of resisting and fighting all of that. So that is one of the most important reasons for why you have this great Islamophobia history. The importance of this region, I've given you the geo-economic factor, but also think of the geopolitical factor. You have top-level IR experts in the US who say that, look, the United States must remain the dominant global power. In order for the United States to remain the dominant global power, Latin America and Sub-Saharan Africa is not so important. The most important part of the world that they must maintain control with their alliances is Eurasia and including northern part of Africa around the Mediterranean. This is where you have the greatest population, this is where you have the greatest economic resources, this is where you have the rising emerging powers that can challenge that. given that you must control, Mackinder talks about this, that you must control all this here. What do you think is the part which is absolutely at the center of this Eurasia, North Africa? It's in fact MENA, the Middle East, North Africa. So even geopolitically, it is very, very important. It's where you have the greatest resistance and so on. So don't be surprised that Islamophobia has been deliberately cultivated. And India and are very happy, and not just India. It's very interesting. The Russians are quite happy, Putin is quite happy with Islamophobia because Chechnya was Muslim. The Chinese are happy. Xinjiang, Muslim. India, Kashmir, Muslim. You have a whole, so these are governments also happy to piggyback. In the case of Israel, Zionism is not so much anti-Muslim as anti-Palestinian. But it is happy to piggyback on anti-Muslimness also. So you have all of these governments and countries seeing benefit from Islamophobia and cultivating it. So I think that's important here. And that is an expression here. And unlike in the case of the Western European countries which have had alliances, which therefore talk about the good Muslim and the bad Muslim and all that over here, anti-Muslimness is foundational to Hindutva, whereas it is more flexible with in other countries. So don't be surprised by it. And as for the last question, this was the question of the crisis of the state in regard to
The rise of populism and the rise of...
Yes, of course. That's of course related, as I said, to larger questions. The de-democratization of the state, the shift, generally speaking, over here. But populism and right-wing populism, of course, they have shifted the center of gravity to the right. So now the state has become much more right-wing and also racist in different ways. So in other words, for a long time, what you had is that you had right and far-right forces shifting the fulcrum of mainstream politics to the right, everywhere. Now you have a situation where far-right forces and all are threatening to come into power and have come more frequently after 2000 into power, either in coalitions or on their own. So in coalitions you have, for example, in Italy and other places, you have far-right groups part of the front. Holland, Denmark, you had a part of it, because sometimes they're out, sometimes they're in. You had in Bolsonaro a far-right force which is in power. Duterte, a far-right force in power. Hindutva, far-right force in power. Orban, and others. So you have all that. So you had a movement which is accelerated. And yeah, you've also had in certain other countries left-wing populism, which has also emerged and then faded. But the spread and frequency of right-wing populism, authoritarian, has been great. And that's something I've thought about. Yes. Other questions? Yes.
Yeah, you have mentioned that Gandhi's, Ambedkar's conversion to Buddhism is an escape route. So, can you please elaborate your point?
Well, that's what I said. I mean, at one time when he was talking about the ILP, he was talking about linking the question of caste to class. But now, in a certain sense, you don't have that. Who is among the caste leaders of caste movement, whether it's Chandrasekhar Azad, Jigmesh Vajmani to a limited extent when he joined the Congress, and now will be applied by the Congress over there. So they are the ones who talk about. So there is no real development in the way there is before. And I gave you the example of leaders of caste and this thing saying that we must link across castes towards that here. And the emphasis is on caste. The emphasis is not on capitalism, on fighting capitalism as a necessary but not sufficient condition for eliminating caste elsewhere. You have a division of laborers, but you have to now try and unite. And what happens with the caste system, as Ambedkar said, it's so graded that if you're not at the complete bottom, and this varies in different regions, you can feel a sense at least I'm not that. So you have a sense of culture. Plus Hindutva says, oh, but you're also part Hindu. You're Hindu, you're part of the larger Hindu fold. And you had, what did we have recently after 2002, something very interesting. You found lower castes, Dalits and tribals, Adivasis, being involved in communal attacks. because your involvement with these others who are doing this thing gets shabash. Oh, you're part of a larger community. Wonderful. You get a sense of empowerment. Empowerment doesn't simply come from good things. It can also come from bad things. It can also come from being part of a larger community that has power.
कैसे खत्म होगा?
तो मैं बता रहा हूँ लॉन्ग टर्म स्ट्रगल है, आपको तो लड़ने का हर साल का इंडेफिनेट बता, ठीक है, ओके.
And do you think on this concept of